Good morning, everyone, and welcome. I want to get started as soon as possible because I've never done a PowerPoint in this room before. I am wildly leaping into the 19th century, and my PowerPoint skills are on display this morning. I also have 51 slides that I want to gallop through, but I promise you I did not bring every picture that we took on the trip, because I didn't want this to be one of those boring slide shows. So there are only 4 beats to this presentation. Before I begin, I want to welcome those of you who may be visiting with us. Certainly those of you who are streaming with us. I'm really grateful for those people who are, more and more people are joining us via this technology of streaming. So welcome to you. If you are in this house and want to get a red welcome bag, they are in the cloister. Please pick one up. They contain flyers about upcoming events, speakers, workshops, Lent event, special preachers. Very excited about Cornel West and Marcus Borg coming. We've got a really heavy invitation out to Robert Reich because we've got his book as we are using his book Beyond Outrage as a one book, one parish study. So go ahead and get your copy and read it. I really recommend it. That's in January and February. We're trying to get him here. And so it's very exciting. If you would like to be on our mailing list, we would love to have you, because we send out an email blast every Thursday about what's coming up on Sunday. And you can sign up here or out there or send us information and we'll get you on the mailing list. Also, we have our action here today, which is we always feel that God calls us to make a difference in the world as well as in our own hearts and souls and minds. And so we want to bind together with all those people of justice concerns to make sure that this unemployment insurance is reinstated for those long-term unemployed sisters and brothers. It was dropped. So please sign this. Yes, you can applaud that if you'd like. And but please sign. Your worship is not over until you take some political action. I really believe that in my heart. And Jesus believed it, and so did the prophets. Also, finally, we would not be able to offer what we offer here without money. And so we unabashedly talk about sex, politics, and money here at All Saints Church. It's a grown-up church. And so we've talked about politics. We'll suspend the conversation about sex today, but we definitely want to talk about money. We would love to have your undergirding investment in this experiment, which is we want to claim ourselves as part of the Christian movement, not the Christian institution. So if that kind of charms your heart, please, there's a pledge. There are pledge cards all around, and we want no gift is too small or too large. So I went to India to see the Dalai Lama. And one of the subtexts of this presentation is that I went in great part because not only Robert Winter invited me to go and foot the bill and all of that, but also because I'd always wanted to do a little bit of the retracing of the steps of Thomas Merton, who is my North Star in spirituality. We'll talk a little bit more about him for sure. But he had written this amazing book called The Asian Journal, which was about his trip to India and other places between mid-October and December 10, when he was killed in 1968. And I took this, I had read it cover to cover in 1973 when it first came out. It's my first edition copy. And I took it with me on this trip because I really did want it to continue to inspire and inform what we did. And certainly it inspired and informed our meeting with His Holiness. So that's one of the subtexts of this, and we'll talk more about Merton at the end of the presentation. But the first beat in all of this is to say, I'm not going to show you slides about every place we went. We did 9 cities in 9 days. So it was you can see the fatigue on the faces of my wife and me at the end of this presentation. But we started after we had a fueling stop in Anchorage and then night in Ulaanbaatar in Mongolia for our pilots to sleep. Then we went to Amritsar and checked into the hotel and immediately got on a prop jet and went to Dharamsala. And this is Dharamsala right there with the Himalayas behind us. And we were about to take a 30-minute van trip up into the hill country where the Dalai Lama lives. And this was on the tarmac, and I had just put on the cassock that my wife and I decided that I should wear some kind of holy garb as a way of showing respect to the Dalai Lama. It was inspired by the fact that on the very day we were there, December 8, was the 45th anniversary of the first meeting, or the only meeting, of Thomas Merton, who's there on the left, and the Dalai Lama. 20 years difference in the two men. Thomas Merton had gone to the Dalai Lama's residence and had a very important conversation with him, which Thomas Merton details in his book, The Asian Journal. My assistant, Marion Tompkins, fixed me a wonderful framed photo of this meeting so that I could present it to the Dalai Lama on the actual 45th anniversary of the event. And in my excitement, I forgot and left the photo on the plane, and so I had to tell him about the present. Once we had gone through security and settled into the room with His Holiness, or waiting for His Holiness, and then he came in, because Desmond Tutu had arranged for the meeting, and there were just three of us, Robert Winter, our host, my wife Hope, and I, along with the Dalai Lama, his assistant, his secretary, a general translator who was keeping notes of the event, and is also a special religious translator, you'll see, I think, later on. Once we sat down and greeted one another, the first thing he wanted to know was, how was Desmond Tutu? And he talked about what deep, close friends they are. And then he wanted to make sure that I understood. He says, you know, Archbishop Tutu calls me mischievous Dalai Lama, and I call him mischievous Archbishop. And so many photos of the two, you can see them actually tickling one another, playing with one another. They are really like two school chums when they get around one another. They just absolutely love one another and love to laugh. And so he wanted to know how he was doing, and then he wanted to know how Nelson Mandela was doing. This was before President Mandela had died. And so I told him what very little I knew about Nelson Mandela. And then he said, you are from South Africa, aren't you? And I said, oh, no, Your Holiness, I'm from Los Angeles, and I've met you before. And in our meeting, I told you about Thomas Merton and how close my wife and I are to Thomas Merton, and how we named our son Peter after Thomas Merton, Peter Edwin Merton Bacon. And immediately he just sighed this deep sigh, and tears filled his eyes, and he said, he was one of my best friends, and he was such a great, great bridge between East and West, and he helped me understand your religion, Christianity. And then he told a story about going to Merton's grave after Merton had been buried. He said, I prayed at his grave for a long time in Kentucky. Merton lived in the monastery of Gethsemane, a Roman Catholic Trappist monastery in outside, not far from Louisville, Kentucky. And His Holiness had prayed there at his grave. I spent, I kind of did a little bit of leading of the conversation, and I thanked him for several things. The first thing I thanked him for was continuing the project that I thought was Thomas Merton's lifelong project, which was to make sure that all of us were going so deep into our own religious tradition that we were tapping the fountain that is common to all of our religions. Meister Eckhart said it is better to dig one well 6 feet deep than 6 one-foot wells, or else you won't get to the water that you need in life. His Holiness expressed his gratitude for that, and he said that it was his lifelong passion and it was one that he would never stop. Then he talked about how compassion and forgiveness are what he considers to be the common element of all traditions. There's an inextricable link between one's personal happiness and kindness, compassion, and caring for others. And this is a two-way street. Increased happiness leads to greater compassion, and increased compassion leads to greater happiness. And he repeated that as though it was some insight that he had had just yesterday, and he has lived this all of his life. Then we got into brain science, which is something that is very important to me. He is very interested and has supported, now for 25 years, I think, neuroscientists coming to meet with him and him meeting with neuroscientists to study the actual changes that take place in the brain called neuroplasticity. When one is mindful, when one observes one's brain, you literally are not your brain. You are your brain, but you're also not your brain, and you and I, in meditation and mindfulness, can observe how our brain is working and when it is in chaos and when it can come to stillness. The man here shown with His Holiness is Dan Siegel, who's a new friend of mine, and I'm taking some classes with him at UCLA because I'm so very interested in brain science, and he's a neuroscientist who's interested in the spirituality of the brain, and has spoken here at All Saints and will be coming back, Dan Siegel. But I think Dr. Richard Davidson, many of you will know his name, his research has been very important, showing that when this particular French Tibetan Buddhist monk meditated on compassion, that the happiness region of the brain became actually activated. The very act of concern for others, well-being, creates a greater sense of well-being within oneself. In fact, this Davidson is up there on the left, behind Dan Siegel and His Holiness. Unfortunately, I don't know the name of the other scientist who's there. So His Holiness said that he really appreciates the work that they're doing, and he says it has so much more to research. And I mentioned in my sermon this Tibetan Buddhist monk that he knows who, after he got out of prison and being tortured by the Chinese, that because he had practiced the compassion meditation, or the metta, every day, expressing compassion and forgiveness toward his torturers, that he did not have the hallmarks of post-traumatic stress syndrome. There's a wonderful book out called Buddha's Brain, The Practical Neuroscience of Happiness, Love, and Wisdom, in which the authors say you can actually use your mind to change your brain, that's neuroplasticity, so that your brain, benefits your mind and everyone else whose life you touch. It is all of this interconnectedness that we live in. Interestingly enough, our host, Robert Winter, was very, very interested in the afterlife. And he ventured a question to His Holiness about what happens when we die. And I thought His Holiness showed so much newness, novelty, unconventionality when he actually kind of reached to one of, this is in several religions, but it's certainly in the Kabbalah of Judaism. He says, the first thing he said was, "I don't know," which is always refreshing, right? From an expert to say, "I don't know what happens in the afterlife." He said, "But I really do like the notion that we all have the divine spark in us, and that when we die, that divine spark goes back to God, and God becomes therefore more whole." It was really a lovely kind of notion of saying, well, this is what I'm wondering about. And then I think the next couple of slides are about the fact that the Dalai Lama is so playful and so giggly. He said, you know, I was talking with a person from Cuba once, and I asked him the same question, if he thought Castro would go to God in the afterlife. And the Dalai Lama was laughing all the way through this, and he said, absolutely. I just wish he would go to God a little faster than he's going. And His Holiness just laughed, just like you just did. There's this amazing ability for this human being who's 78 years old now to be an instrument of affection and physical connectivity. We had gone through all of these different points that I've just outlined and more. And I had been told to sit at the edge of the sofa and that he would be sitting in this chair. And he, at one point, just grabbed my hand and put it very affectionately to his cheek, which was one of the most moving things that has ever happened to me. And I leaned in response, and then he leaned in and put his forehead on my forehead. Now, when I was in Hawaii 2 years ago working on my book, I asked a couple of natives what aloha meant. Is it just to say a hello greeting or how are you doing? And they said, absolutely not. That aloha means actually putting your forehead, touching another person's forehead, then breathing deeply, and then breathing in the new air, the new energy that is created by the two of you coming together. And I think that's the true meaning, alo, coming together, ha, breath. And I think that that is, again, common to so many different religions. And it certainly was a very natural thing for His Holiness to do with me. Then he said, thank you, and he got up and he says, let's have some photographs. And he sat between my wife and me and held our hands and continued talking and giggling nonstop. He said, you know, I am a professional laugher. And then he took a look at my girth and said, how much do you weigh? And then, of course, we began to laugh. And he said, and then we laughed even more. And he leaned into my laugh and he said, you know, my doctor told me I have to reduce. Maybe you need to go see your doctor. I'm sorry, many of you have heard this story told a million times, and I'm not telling any of these stories ever again. Then it was time, right? Then it was time for our farewell, and the conventional way of leaving is to receive a kata from someone, and he gave us these beautiful silk katas. And then after we had received the katas, he motioned to the curtains that you can see behind him and me there. And he went over and chose gifts for each one of us. And he gave me this beautiful peacock, which is a Buddhist symbol for wisdom, which I really appreciate. And he gave Robert Winter a carved yak. And then he gave to Hope a beautiful bejeweled little case of candy. And when he gave it to her, he said, don't let him have any of it. Laughter is crucial for all of us, I think. It's good for us. Everybody in this room who's been laughing is younger than you were and I was when we came in the room. But I love that this quotation from Meister Eckhart about God and laughter. Do you know what is in the center of the universe? I will tell you. The Creator laughed and gave birth to the Christ. The Christ laughed back and gave birth to the Spirit. They all three laughed together and gave birth to humanity. And it is laughter, my child, that is in the core of the universe, because laughter is at the center of the Trinity. Well, we were absolutely beaming afterwards. I mean, it was such an afterglow. So we went out and kind of toured on our own the temple. I heard monks praying. A person came up to me and asked me to bless him and his family, which I was very happy to do. We were just floating on air. And then it was time to go back to the hotel and go to Delhi. We spent 4 nights in Delhi and made side trips from Delhi. The only other moment about India I want to talk about right now, before questions, is our desire to go and see the Ganges River, particularly the part of it that flows through Varanasi, one of the oldest cities in the world. It's a river that divides the boundary of Bangladesh and India, and I'll tell you a little bit about it. It's just amazingly vast. I'd heard so many horrible things about how polluted it is, which of course it is. However, I really did understand how it is a symbol of cleansing and purity. I grew up as a river boy. Our larger family owns some property along the Altamaha River, which empties into the Atlantic Ocean. And this really reminded me of days swimming in the Altamaha River, although I didn't swim in the Ganges. Although I did put my Lakers cap in. I thought that would help the Lakers. So if you see me with my Lakers cap on, it's been washed in the Ganges. But no place along the banks is more longed for at the moment of death by Hindus than Varanasi, this wonderful old city. It's a great cremation ground, and those who are lucky enough to die in Varanasi are cremated on the banks of the Ganges and are granted instant salvation. If the death has occurred somewhere else, salvation can be achieved by immersing the ashes in the Ganges. And after the cremation of the deceased at Varanasi's Ghats, the bones and ashes are thrown into the Ganges. We saw people doing their daily ablutions there. It was just so very natural. So many people dipping into the Ganges as a way of belief that the Ganges removes symbolic dirt. It wipes away the sins of the bather, not just of the present, but of a lifetime. We also saw families coming for rites of passage. This was a little boy who was getting his hair cut before being dipped into the Ganges by his parents. The Ganges is the most sacred river to Hindus and is a lifeline to millions of Indians who live along its banks. It's worshipped as the goddess Ganga in Hinduism. Ganga is a consort to all three major male deities of Hinduism, Brahma, Vishnu, and Shiva. And sorry I don't have a close-up, but the reason this slide is in there is because of the mural there of the Ganges represented as a goddess who is, I think, she's riding the back of a crocodile. When we got into the boat, there was a Hindu priest on board who gave us all tikas or tilakas. It is seen as logging you in to the third eye by which we can see spiritual reality. In this understanding, we have not only the two eyes of physical sight, but we have this third eye of spiritual sight. And so each of us received pigment between our eyes with rice on that pigment. And here is the Hindu priest who is in our boat actually tying on a red thread. It's a sacred red string bracelet known as kalava, tied onto the wrist at the beginning of a ceremony. It symbolizes blessings to the wearer, and still wearing mine that I received that day. I look at it and it reminds me that I actually was there, because sometimes I was pinching myself, couldn't believe that I got to do this thing that was on my bucket list. He chanted this beautiful chant while he was tying these thread bracelets onto our wrists. And also, we were surrounded by marigolds, considered to be holy flowers, garlands when we got onto the boat. And then after we'd received our tikas and after we'd see our red thread bracelets, then we were given these votive candles to float down the Ganges as a symbol of prayer and a lot of other things. It was just an amazing experience to be in the kind of overwhelming vastness of beauty, of holiness, and to realize how interconnected we all are by water. Then the last stop was in Bangkok. Sawatdee is a greeting that Thais give to one another with a slightly cocked head and a smile. It's not unlike the greeting of Namaste. It is so important, and it feels so good. It's like a blessing. And even Ronald McDonald gives it to you when you're on the streets. Our host wanted to go to Bangkok because of some business interests there and some interest in the whole city. I was interested in saying, yes, we'll go to Bangkok, because Bangkok is where Thomas Merton went at the end of his Asian journey. He went to address monastics, both Eastern and Western monastics, monastics of Hinduism, Buddhism, and Christianity. And so I was hoping that we could go out to the site where he died, but we were unable to. We were exhausted, but he had gone to the Emerald to see the Emerald Buddha, and we went there, but we got there too late. And then we went on to see the Reclining Buddha, which is this last story I want to tell you about. So we went to Wat Pho, which is an amazing monastery, another Buddhist monastery, but not Tibetan monasticism, as you'll see in the robes in just a second. But Wat Pho is also known as being a great place of Thai massage classes. And had we had time, we're supposed to get a Thai massage. And it's because Wat Pho Monastery was considered to be, by the founder of it, which is a king, a great university. And obviously, massage is a very important skill to have in your education. So we went, and we went to see the Great Reclining Buddha, just an amazingly blissful expression on the face of this reclining Buddha. The Buddha is huge. I mean, just you can imagine, you can see there in terms of perspective of Hope and me, at the feet of this gigantic Buddha. And so we had a wonderful time and enjoyed the soles of the Buddha's feet there. Tell the story of the Buddha in, I think it's Mother of Pearl. There are all the stories on the soles of the feet. It's an amazing piece of art. But the reason I wanted to talk with you about it is because we went into this temple, which is there on the grounds of Wat Pho. This is, rather than a reclining Buddha, this is a meditating Buddha, and it's very hard to see its detail because it's just gleaming in gold leaf, and it's very, very difficult to, in a photograph, to make out the detail. But we went in and immediately were taken by the monks who were meditating there to our left, and we were sitting on a carpeted floor facing the meditating Buddha. And we had engaged a guide to guide us there. And there's the meditating Buddha. And so we're sitting there on the floor, and all of a sudden I had an experience I've never had before. It was as if these doors of my chest simply opened, and then all these prayers began cascading out of my chest or my soul. And it was as if there was some kind of spiritual invisible pulley taking my body down to the floor. And it didn't feel as if I was using, any abdominal or back muscles or anything. I was just going down through this spiritually gravitational pull. And I keep people on my prayer list, and I began to pray for those people. And then I began to pray for members of my family. And then I began to pray for all of you, everybody at All Saints. And then after a while, I was praying for everybody in the world. And it was like this non-cognitive spiritual reality of prayers of love and healing simply pouring out of my chest. It was one of the most amazing mystical experiences I've ever had. Afterwards, I had to stop and take a photo of this lotus. Hope and I had been to hear Thich Nhat Hanh speak at the Pasadena Civic Center not long before we went. And he loves to talk about no mud, no lotus. Without suffering, there can be no happiness. And I thought it was just a wonderful thing to be reminded of from a different kind of Buddhist monk from Vietnam. So I close with talking about Merton's last days. The segue here is a photo of Merton and Thich Nhat Hanh when both were quite young. And I have several points to make. Merton wrote in this Asian journal, "I come as a pilgrim, who is anxious to obtain not just information, not just facts about other monastic traditions, but to drink from ancient sources of monastic vision and experience. I seek not only to learn more quantitatively about religion and monastic life, but to become a better and more enlightened monk, qualitatively, myself. In Hinduism, there is this notion that you can know so much about honey. You can know its chemical properties, you can know its cultural use, you can know how it served people throughout the world and throughout history. You can write tomes and tomes of information about honey. But if you've never tasted honey, you don't know what honey is. And I think that's really, really important for you and me as we start the year 2014. We can know so much about religion, so much about spirituality. We can have so much head knowledge about compassion and grace and mercy and love. But if we don't taste it, if we don't experience it, none of that helps us. Merton also thought that his journey was about recovering our original unity. The deepest level of communication is not communication, but communion. It is wordless, it is beyond words, and it is beyond speech, and it is beyond concept. Not that we discover a new unity, we discover an older unity. My dear brothers, he was addressing some monks at that point, we are already one. But we imagine that we're not. And what we have to recover is, that should be is instead of us, is our original unity. What we have to be is what we are. I think that's so very important for all of us. I mean, there's so much neuroscience coming out about the powers of understanding how we are interconnected. And when we do that, something really transformative happens in our lives. Merton also was interested in this trip on total inner transformation. His last speech, he said, what is essential in monastic life? And by the way, folks, he saw monastic life as much bigger than people who are monks in or nuns who are in monastic enclosures, but rather someone who's a marginal person, which I think everybody who touches All Saints is a marginal person in some way, who takes up some kind of marginal love-hate relationship with church, with religion, with what's going on in the world, a kind of a critical, self-critical perspective. In any case, he said, what's essential in monastic life is not embedded in buildings, it's not embedded in clothing, it's not necessarily embedded even in a rule. It is somewhere along the line of something deeper than a rule. It is concerned with this business of total inner transformation. And then here's this lifelong project that I was talking with the Dalai Lama about, this learning more about your religion's power through openness to other religions. I believe that by openness to Buddhism, and he said this the morning he died, I believe that by openness to Buddhism, to Hinduism, and to these great Asian traditions, we stand a wonderful chance of learning more about the potentiality of our own traditions, because they have gone from the natural point of view so much deeper in this than we have in the West. The combination of the natural techniques and the graces and the other things that have been manifested in Asia and the Christian liberty of the gospel should bring us all at last to that full and independent liberty, which is beyond mere cultural differences and mere externals and mere this and mere that. I will conclude on that note. I believe that the plan is to have all the questions for this morning's lectures this evening at the panel. So I will now disappear. Those were his last public words. He had lunch and then he went to his room. But before I talk about that, I love this call to have a new language of prayer. This was a prayer that he gave in October, at the beginning of the journey, while he was in Calcutta. He was talking about how limiting the repetitive language of religion can be. And he said we have to have a new language. This new language of prayer has to come out of something which transcends all our traditions and comes out of the immediacy of love. The things on the surface are nothing. What is deep is the real, with a capital R. We are creatures of love, with a capital L. Let us therefore join hands. And he had them all join hands. And I will try to say something that comes out of the depths of our hearts. I ask you to concentrate now on the love that is in you. That was a call for everybody to connect with their own soul, I think. And that is in us all, the collective soul of us all. I have no idea what I'm going to say. I'm going to be silent a minute, and then I'll say something. And this is what he said. Oh God, we are one with you. You have made us one with you. You've taught us that if we are open to one another, you dwell in us. Help us to preserve this openness and to fight for it with all our hearts. Help us to realize that there can be no understanding where there is mutual rejection. Oh God, in accepting one another wholeheartedly, fully, completely, we accept you, and we thank you, and we adore you, and we love you with our whole being. Because our being is your being, our spirit is rooted in your spirit. Fill us then with love, and let us be bound together with love as we go our diverse ways, united in this one spirit which makes you present in the world and which makes you witness to the ultimate reality that is love. Love has overcome. Love is victorious. Amen. So after that last speech, Merton had lunch, and then he was killed when he stepped out of his afternoon shower and accidentally tripped on the electrical cord of a large standing fan. The fan fell on him and electrocuted him, and when they burst into his room an hour later, the fan was still on. Thank you for your attention. So we have time for a couple of questions. Tom, yell out your question. We've got a mic coming, but go ahead and I'll repeat it.
First of all, Ed, I want to say Tom, and thank you, not just for this, which was wonderful, but for your splendid sermon this morning.
Thank you.
On precisely blessing and taking that all up.
Thank you.
And I have been mesmerized with the continuation of what you were saying and what you experienced here with this great man are much the same. And what has enriched me most, though, is that I have long worked in South African and African theology and so on, and the great Xhosa value of Ubuntu. Ubuntu means
it's all the same.
None of us is ever fully alive
Right.
except in communion with one another.
Right.
This is just what you were saying this morning, in communion with one another, to find out where that point of connection is. And that is Ubuntu, the blessing of us all.
Thanks, Tom. Okay, other question? Thank you. Comment? Yes, please. Hi, Nancy.
Hi. You said that someone was taking notes of your meeting. What's to be done with those notes? Can we read them?
I don't know. I can ask. I've been asking so much, but I'll ask. I don't know what's happening with those notes, but I will ask. I've asked the Dalai Lama to come and visit us, so I'll ask about those notes. I'll say, I have a parishioner who would like to see those notes, please. Other questions or comments? Right there, please.
Just a simple question. What languages does the Dalai Lama speak? And does he speak English very well so that you had your conversation in English?
Neat question. He does speak English very, very well, but there were times when he would turn to his three assistants who were there to ask for help with a word I'd used. for instance, he speaks Tibetan. That's his language. And when I was answering the question about Desmond Tutu, he says, he's getting so old. How is he? You know, I mean, he just is so playful and he's so loving. And you know he's not, you would never take this stuff personally. And so I said, well, a lot of people asked me to ask him to come and speak. And he says, please tell him I'm old and decrepit. And so he turned to the decrepit, and so they gave him a Tibetan word for that. So that's kind of how it went. He would, from time to time, ask them questions. Yeah, there was a question over here, please. Yeah, Bill?
The future of Tibet. Dalai Lama's playing such a crucial role in the future of Tibet, and just wondered if there's any conversation about his role as he grows older, and as that becomes a more contentious situation with China.
Yeah, I think I know nothing about this question, but I do sense that there is some contention that's growing. But China is going through its own changes as well. So I think it's going to be very, very interesting. There have been challenges to, the Chinese government has put up its own substitute Lama, not for the Dalai Lama, but a different kind of Lama. So I think we're going to see a lot of contention and probably a lot of chaos. Thank God he's a very youthful 78-year-old Dalai Lama. Yeah. Raise your hand so we can get the mic to you. That it? Oh, here's a question right here, right there.
I attended Woodstock School in the Himalayas, and when the Dalai Lama was fleeing Tibet, he was given asylum at our school.
Ah, nice. Yeah, in 1959. He was just a teenager. Any other questions, comments? Pardon me. Yes.
I wanted to say how much I've appreciated your path this way. I mean, from your original telling the tale of Merton, it changed our whole Covenant 2 group. But where do we go as a community to do this multi-tiered practice that, we understand is the Bible in one hand and the newspaper in the other, but is so, not just of the mind.
Sure.
And how do we cultivate that in our community? I think you see it, but realizing it as a group is so hard.
Well, such a great question, Mark. Thank you very much for asking. I hinted at this in my sermon this morning, that I really would love for us to become even more known as a community of contemplation and action. I truly believe you cannot have one without the other, that action drives you to contemplation, contemplation drives you to action. We're in conversation, obviously, with Richard Rohr. He's allowing us to have his teaching series so that we can show it here. John Depp House is working out when we're going to be doing that. We're hoping to use that as a way to lure Richard back, although in his 71st year, he's said he doesn't want to travel anymore. But we're also doing some important kind of behind-the-scenes conversations about what would it be to teach the contemplative practices here at All Saints. And as we all know, who've contemplated together, have meditated together, prayed together, that the energy, the transformative power of contemplation is much more potent when groups of people do it than when you're doing it by yourself. That's why you have monastic enclosures anyway. And it works both ways, and there's an oscillation process of doing it alone and also, or in solitude, as well as in a community. So what would it be like for us to have, prior to a service here at All Saints Church, a time in which we contemplate together? And it would be an option, and you could wait outside until the time of contemplation was over, and then we would have the voluntary and crank it up the way we always crank it up, kick it for Jesus kind of thing. But all of these ideas are kind of swirling around. I definitely have been changed by Merton, reading him early on in my life, but also the fact that we at All Saints have been a part of a very durable interfaith community here in Los Angeles, with the three amigos, sometimes the four amigos, Leonard Bierman, George Regas, and Maher Hatut leading the way, and Maher's brother, Hassan. And we are the beneficiaries and the stewards of that. And then in 9/11, you know, we all gathered, many of us gathered at the mosque at USC and heard this mom say in a wonderful way, to be religious in the 21st century is to be interreligious. So what is it like to look at the Bible from an interreligious, interfaith, and spiritual lens? What is it like to look at Jesus? When you do that, you just really see what an interfaith being Jesus was. He's always telling the stories about non-Jews encountering Jews. And you know, in today's story, these astrologers from the East who come to worship Jesus. I mean, right there in the infancy narratives, we have this strike for interreligious life. So what is that going to be for us? And I think all of us are very, very interested, and we think that all of this stuff that Merton was talking about is really, really important. So stay tuned. Please, 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 please stay in communication with me. Send me anything that you're learning. Somebody was just telling me that they're going to send me some stuff about research on reincarnation, and that's come on NPR. So let's stay in dialogue, I'm sure, and I'm convinced that it's power, it's inspiration, and it's transformational. Thank you very much for your attention this morning.